Alright, so turn to a clean set of pages in your notebook. The left will be a review and a reflect. That'll be page 25. And then the right will start the new section. So your review, say factor completely. That might mean take out a GCF. That might mean factor by grouping. So number 1, we have negative 8b to the 6th plus 16b to the 4th minus 8b squared. So factor that completely. Number 2, we have 7k to the 3rd minus 28k squared minus 15k plus 60. And number 3, we have 28v to the 3rd plus 16v squared minus 21v minus 12. The reflection question: what are the steps to factoring trinomials? Which is what this video is about. You want to be able to do that from memory. So not just copying over, but from memory. Not today, but another day. Try to remember the steps to factoring trinomials from memory. There's 5 steps, but I call the first one step 0. And you'll see why here in just a second. So it's step 0 through 4, and I want you to try to remember those and write them in your own words for factoring trinomials. So on another day. Go ahead and pause the video. Take as long as you need to answer these 3 questions. Pause the video, do your work, then play the video, and you can see the answers. Alright, so number 1, we have negative 8b to the 6th plus 16b to the 4th minus 8b squared. It's not 4 terms, it's only 3. All we know to do is take out a GCF, which would be negative 8b squared. And that leaves you with b to the 4th minus 2b squared minus, plus 1. So you take out the leading negative. That changes the other 2 signs. And that would be factoring out the GCF. Number 2, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. So we will group. Between the first 2 terms, there's a 7 in common and a k squared. That leaves k minus 4. The second 2 terms, we've got that negative, so we're going to take out negative 15. That should also leave k minus 4. For a final factored form of 7k squared minus 15 times k minus 4. Your back-to-back binomials. If we were to FOIL those back together, we'd get back to the original problem. And finally, number 3, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, so we're going to group. Between 28 and 16, there's a 4 in common, and then there's a v squared in common. That leaves 7v plus 4. Between the second 2 terms, again, that third one's negative, so we're going to take out a negative. Between 21 and 12, they have a 3 in common. That also leaves 7v plus 4. For a final factored form of 4v squared minus 3 and 7v plus 4. Back-to-back binomials. So when you have 4 terms, you factor by grouping, just like we practiced. Alright, so now you're going to be on page 26, the next side of your notebook. This will be page 26. This is section 9.2 on factoring trinomials. Now, if you did not have me for Math 0308, you might have learned this differently. There's lots of different techniques for factoring trinomials. If you remember how you were taught and it works for you, continue with that method. If you don't quite remember or it didn't quite work, try to learn this method. This is from the textbook. I follow this method for every single trinomial just to be consistent. So we'll write down the steps first. Step 0 is to check for and factor out any GCFs. Anything you can find that's in common, pull it out. So you kind of hunt for that. You look and look and look, see if there's a GCF you need to take out. You need to do that before you touch anything else about the problem. So always check for and factor out any GCFs. I call it step 0 so that it stands out in your mind. You have to do that before you do anything else. Step 1, you multiply the coefficient A times the coefficient C. I'll explain where those letters come from here in just a second. And you make what I call a T-chart. Again, I'll explain what that looks like here in just a second. Step 2, you're going to think, and it really is a thinking step, think of two numbers, positive or negative, that multiply to AC, whatever A times C is, and at the same time those same two numbers need to add to the B. Now AC and B are coefficients, and again I'll show you here in just a second. I want to finish writing out the steps. Step 3, once you've done that, you use those two numbers, the two you thought of, to split the middle term. And once you've split the middle term, step 4 is to factor by grouping, which is what we learned in class. Factor by grouping. Alright, so a trinomial, a standard form trinomial. Tri means 3, so this is 3 terms. It usually looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. That's generally how you'll see them. There'll be a coefficient on x, a coefficient on x squared, a coefficient on x, and a constant. Could be positive, could be negative, but you've got the x squared term, the x term, and a constant term. And we label those coefficients a, b, and c for reference for when we're factoring. And our goal, again, is to get those back-to-back binomials that multiply together to make the trinomial. So let's do an easy one together. Example 1, if I have x squared minus 6x plus 8. I have 3 terms. It's a trinomial, so I'm going to use my steps. First thing to think about, and I'm going to teach this as if you've never seen it, or it's been a long time, is you look at your coefficients, A, B, and C. A, B, and C. And you check for GCF. So this leading coefficient on the x squared is a 1. So between 1, 6, and 8, is there a GCF other than 1? No. Then you look at your terms, x squared, x, and a constant, no GCFs there. So step 0, no GCFs. And you might want to make a note that we checked for it and there's no GCFs. Then you're going to multiply A times C. So A, B, C, go in order. We're going to multiply A times C and make what's called a T-chart. This is an extra step that I do to help students organize their work. So you make a little T-chart kind of off to the side. A in this case is 1, C is 8. So you're going to do 1 times 8, which is 8. The other side of the T-chart, I always write the B term. The B term on this one is negative 6. So that's step 1. Multiply A times C and make a T-chart with B. Some of my students think of it as C times A, which is the same thing as A times C, and then B, and it spells the word CAB, and that helps them remember how the chart goes. So some of my students will call this the CAB chart, C-A-B, which is just switching the A and the C, which is no big deal. However, you need to remember it. But the chart definitely helps you see what you're trying to get to. So we've checked for GCFs. We've multiplied A times C and made a T-chart. Here comes the thinking step. So step 2, it says think of two numbers that multiply to AC and add to B. For some students, that's a piece of cake. For some students, we'd be here all day thinking of pairs. So you're going to think of numbers that multiply to 8 and see if they also add to negative 6. So that's your job. I need to think of things that add to 8. 1 and 8. Do those add to negative 6? No. 2 and 4. Those multiply to 8. Do those add to negative 6? No. Negative 2 and negative 4 multiply to positive 8, and they add to negative 6. So you just start thinking of multiples, sometimes make them positive, make them negative, whatever you need to do, until you find the magic pair that multiply to AC and add to B at the same time. So my magic pair for this one is negative 2 and negative 4. So we're going to use those two numbers to do what's called splitting the middle term. So we split the middle term. Means we leave the first term the same, just x squared. We're going to take those two numbers that we found and split the middle term. So it's going to be minus 2x minus 4x. Whatever variable is attached to the middle term is the variable you put on your split. That doesn't change. If that's a y, we put a y. If it's an xy, we put an xy. If it's a q, we put a q. Whatever is there, is that's what we put. And then we leave the last term alone. So we make our chart off to the side so that we have room to split our middle. From there, step 4 is to do what we did in class, factor by grouping. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, so we group. Between the first two terms, there's an x in common. That leaves x minus 2. Second two terms, there's a negative 4 in common. And that would also leave x minus 2. So my answer in factored form is x minus 4 times x minus 2. If I wanted to check my answer, I could FOIL them back together to see if I get back to the original. So if I do x times x, that's x squared. X times negative 2 is minus 2x. Negative 4 times x, negative 4x. And negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8. If we combine like terms, that makes x squared minus 6x plus 8, which is my original polynomial. So again, your answer are the back-to-back binomials. If you want to check your answer, you FOIL them to make sure that you get back to where you started. Alright, I'm going to turn the page because I wrote kind of big for that one. I want to give you one to try. I want you to pause the video and try this example, and then you can start the video back up. So example 2, let's do x squared minus 3x minus 10, and the directions are to factor completely. Go ahead and pause the video, try this example, and then play the video back.